All right, so welcome to Flossing with Picasso, How to Develop Creative Habits. I'm August, and just some reminders. Obviously, you're all muted, so you don't need to know that, but feel free to jump in and talk by pressing the space bar, unmuting yourself, or whatever. So yeah, just a few reminders. This is being recorded, so if you're not okay with that or if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to one of the counselors, or you can email me or just say in the chat or whatever that you don't want to be in the video. Yeah, so this is going to be a lecture, but hopefully you guys feel comfortable chiming in if you have any questions or comments. So you can type questions or comments in the chat, or feel free to just jump in and interrupt me. So just to sort of set some expectations for the workshop, this is, like I said, hopefully a conversation on habits. So what works, what doesn't work. I'll tell you what's worked for me and some of the systems that I implement with my habits. And I'll sort of give you a book report on a really cool book on habits that I'm reading called Atomic Habits by James Clear. What this won't be is an in-depth sort of workshop on how to be creative. I know that when I was designing the workshop, I sort of had intended it to be a mix of both, but the more that I worked on this, the more I realized they were going to take up too much time if I try to smash them both together. So I'm not going to be going super in-depth on like how to generate ideas or how to like get unstuck if you're like in the middle of a project and you don't know where to go. But hopefully the systems that we're going to use to develop habits are also going to be things that you can use in creative projects or creative processes also. So just as a sort of outline for what we're going to be going through today, I'll just sort of give you an introduction to me. Then hopefully I'll hear from some of you. Obviously, I know that at camp, a lot of times it's nice just to be in the background and listen. So don't feel the need to jump in and talk about yourself if you don't want to, but hopefully I can hear from some of you as to what you're looking for in the workshop. Then I'm going to go over my past techniques, including a morning ritual, bullet journals, 100 days of making, and then I'm going to go over that book that I mentioned just now, Atomic Habits by James Clear. And for those of you who might be leaving the workshop early, I'm going to have this as a thing in the end of my slides also, but if you could go to this bit.ly link and let me know what you think of the workshop afterwards, just some quick comments on things you like, things you didn't like, things you wish I would have spent more or less time on would be super helpful as I try to make these better. Yeah, so first off, I'm August Lures, he, him, or they, them pronoun. Just graduated from ITP, so I almost said I was a second year, but I'm not a second year anymore. And I'm from Texas, lived out in LA for a long time, and been out here for ITP ever since. So to give you an idea of what I want to hear from y'all, so one habit that you like, one habit that you hate, one habit you wish you had, if you've tried any habit or habit breaking techniques and were they successful or unsuccessful. So one habit that I really like is my ritual, which I'm going to go into later, where I sort of take some time every day to work on little tiny habits like reading or cleaning or exercising. And one habit that I wish that I had was waking up without snoozing my alarm. I hate it. I don't know why it's so difficult for me to do things like when I first wake up, but I can't not snooze my alarm. And so I guess that's also the habit that I hate is waking up and not being able to just get up out of bed. So yeah, if I could hear from any of y'all, anyone who wants to jump in, feel free to introduce yourself and what brings you to the workshop, what you're looking for, and yeah, any of these things. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for chiming in. And like I said earlier, if you missed the beginning, feel free to unmute yourself at any time or put some questions or comments in the chat. I'm going to be it's going to be kind of like a lecture, but feel free to jump in and we can talk about things as they come up. Okay. So before I get into my systems, I want to sort of start with just foundational kind of philosophy that I have, habits that I've developed over the years of being so obsessed with them. And I also want to stress that like I'm not an expert. I'm not some researcher that I did cognitive science as my undergrad, but I'm not like a brain expert. I don't know all these things about what's best for us or how we can do whatever. But I do have a lot of strong opinions, and so feel free to disagree with me. But I just wanted to start by sort of explaining where I come from and my approach to habits. So I think a lot of people approach habits the way that I used to, which is, if you try hard enough, anything is possible. It's sort of, this thing that we teach kids, if you want something bad enough, it'll happen. but it leaves out like 99% of what actually is required to achieve that goal, which is towards it. We're often told to focus on our goals as if, just putting up a picture of our dream vision board will make it materialize in front of us. But we're not told how to work towards our goals. And then we get dismayed when we try and fail. So, the narrative that society pushes us is if you fail, you must not have wanted it enough. That somehow passion is directly correlated to willpower. And yeah, willpower doesn't work. Awesome, perfect example. But yeah, I believe, you can have drive, you can have passion, you can have grit or whatever, but there's not some magical pool of energy called willpower inside of us that we can expend to do things that are hard. We're biological creatures. We're governed by the contract that we signed when we put on these meat suits. And one of those bylaws is that our brains and our bodies require energy to exert effort. And the more often that we take on that effort, the easier and less energy that effort requires in the future. The point being, discipline is not some spiritual quality that you can use to will yourself to do things. It's a muscle that you have to exercise. You can't will yourself to some impossible standard, no matter how much you really want it. It's not about passion, it's about practice. And the more you practice, the better you'll be at it. But what's really the root here? Why do we want to practice these skills or develop these habits or whatever? I would argue that everyone here, myself included, wants to have these better habits because they want to be a better person. It's not particularly insightful. Of course, you want to be better. If you don't, you'd either be a lazy piece of shit with no desire to change, or you'd be an egotistical narcissist that thinks it couldn't possibly be better. But I think that there's a problem with that thinking, and it's important to address it now because I believe it's the root of why so many of us have trouble sticking to habits. And it's about shoulds. I think shoulds are our enemy. Shoulds are, whenever you say, I should eat healthier, or I should wake up at 6:30, or whatever you want that translates to some habit that you're trying to form or habit that you're trying to break. It's because you believe that the perfect or the better you would do that thing. So if you want to be that version, the good version of me would eat a salad instead of a burger at lunch or whatever, then I should do that. The obvious flip side of that, though, is when you inevitably don't do that thing, you've built into this narrative, the narrative that you built into your mind is, oh, well, that must mean that I'm the bad version. You feel shame. And you shouldn't, because nobody's perfect. You inevitably are going to not do the thing that you want to do because you're human. But that's not what the story that you've told yourself is. And so you get demotivated. You feel like you're not good enough, and so that demotivation turns into further inaction or bad habits, and that makes you feel more ashamed. And then here we are in the whirlpool shit pit of everything is terrible and so am I, or the whirlpool shit pit of feeling awful and not doing anything. I know we've all been there. It's a terrible place, and it's hard to crawl out of. But as impossible as it may seem, I'm here to tell you, you are already enough. You don't need to read every day or budget better or lose 20 pounds to be a human being that is worthy of love. You don't need to change anything to be the perfect you. And I know this seems a little contradictory, a little double thinky, but hear me out. It's possible to love and accept and celebrate who you are in this moment while also honoring your potential for more. I know, and I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to y'all. I know how hard it is to believe that this you is just as deserving of happiness as the you want to be. But loving yourself as you are now is one of the most important steps in building better habits, because that baseline will protect you from that whirlpool shit pit of self-deprecation whenever you inevitably falter or fail at your habit. More than that, loving yourself as you are now is fuel for sticking to your habits, because don't you want the best for those you love? If you could do a little something every day that would help your partner or your parent or your child be happier and healthier than they are now, wouldn't you do that thing? So do the things today that will make you happier in the future, because that's what you do for the people you care about. Okay, so that's about as fluffy as I'm going to get presentation, but I felt like it was important to start off with that. Thank you for bearing with me. I promise we're going to start focusing on the practical steps of habit formation and retention, but I felt it important to start with that. I think it's important that from the start, you're setting yourself up for success, and that starts with being aware of who you are and how you feel in the present moment. There's a famous Zen story that's quoted in a dozen different ways, but the essence is that a student asks the Roshi, "Master, what is enlightenment?" And the master replies, "When hungry, eat, when tired, sleep." And I find that a really useful waypoint to use in my daily life, especially when I'm struggling, because we're human. We're not machines. We can't do the same thing 1,000 times perfectly the exact same way. We have too many variables going on. So it's important to listen to yourself and to know what you need. If I'm working on a habit where I want to wake up at 6:30 every day, no matter what, but I come down with the flu, I need to rest. I need to prioritize my health over my habit. And the flip side of this self-awareness is that you also know when your feeling is coming from a place of habit also. If I'm trying to go on a run every morning, but whenever I wake up tired, I say, "Oh, well, when tired, sleep," that's different. I need to cultivate the self-awareness to know what feelings to push past and which to stop and listen to. So finally, with this section, before I go into my systems, I just want to emphasize something that we're going to talk about in more detail later. And that's set yourself up for success in sticking to habits. And that's to focus on a process over a product. If your goal is to write a book in a month, sure, you could do that. It's physically possible to write a book in a month. But if something comes up that month at work, or you fall behind on your pages for some reason, and suddenly it's the end of the month and you only have half a chapter done, you feel like a failure. And as we just said, that makes you want to try less. So the next thing you know, it's next year and you still haven't worked on the book. However, if from the beginning you instead just said, all right, I'm just going to write 100 words a day or 1,000 words a day or whatever, it doesn't matter if they're bad, if they're good, I'm just going to write every day no matter what. Maybe you don't have a book in a month, but you have a process that works. It's a habit, and soon 100 or 1,000 words every day add up. Even though it took you longer than you wanted, you ended up finishing, which is better than when you were too ambitious and ended up with nothing. As a version of the saying goes, best is the enemy of done. So lastly, one thing I hear a lot when people are trying to develop new skills is that they feel like it's too late. They compare themselves to others, to the standards set by society or what they see on social media, and they feel that shame again. Oh, I can't start painting now. Look at this 20-year-old on Instagram who's already better than I'll ever be. But something an old professor of mine said that really resonated with me was, hey, you'll either be the 50-year-old who can play the guitar, or you'll be the 50-year-old who can't. So now that we've had a little bit of some of my foundational philosophy on this, I want to go into more detail on some of the habit systems that I've tried. And then, like I said at the beginning, the last half, I'll be talking in detail about this really, really helpful and practical book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. So my biggest habit kind of system that I talk about and that I have written about a lot is this thing I call the ritual. And it's this thing that I try to do every day. Like some of you mentioned, you take a walk for an hour every day. For me, I do something for an hour every day. It doesn't matter what it is, so long as it's something that is putting me in service to my higher self. And I, higher self is this woo-woo term that I don't really vibe with, but it's a way of describing, the person that I want to be. Even though, like I said before, I'm enough right now, but still. And so it didn't matter what I was doing so long as I was doing something. And the motto I kind of used for that was turning discipline into discipleship. So I was becoming a disciple of myself and making sure that I was, treating myself as reverent as I would, a God, if I was going to church every Sunday or something. It was like keeping that sacred space every day to work on something that was good for me. And it's how I got to ITP. Before I started doing the ritual, I just felt very lost and aimless and, wasn't doing things that were very good for me and was just kind of like living day by day. And then once I started doing the ritual and did some things as a part of the ritual, there was a series of events and then I ended up at ITP. And I started doing it in January 2017. And I've done it so far 965 times since then. So like 76% of the days since then, I've done this thing for an hour every day on average, which equates to roughly like 10 days of every year that I do this thing, which is like a lot when you think about it that way. But I realized that when I started, or when I was trying to decide what to do to make myself into this person that could do that could have discipline, I realized that I just felt a lot of like disgust about myself. I felt a lot of shame about, you know, the type of person that I was. And I tried to read every day or write every day, or I tried to exercise, or I tried to diet, and I never could stick to it. And I had this narrative in my head of being this person who couldn't stick to a habit or couldn't be disciplined enough to do anything. And it really like messed with everything in my life, because you know, I realized that if I didn't have the discipline to do something like this, how was I going to be successful at anything in my life? And I just came to this point where I just could not stand, you know, being a person who couldn't have a habit. And so I realized that to kind of get around this idea, I wanted to make a habit about developing a habit. And so it wasn't about what I was doing, just that I was doing. Like I said, it was process over product. And so my hope was just sort of like, if I can carve out some amount of time every day, then later on I can fill it with whatever I need, or I can expand it to be whatever I wanted. But all that it mattered was that I was setting aside the time every day, so that I then became the person who could set aside time every day to do something. So one thing that I really vibed with was this idea that the structure like sets me free. You know, like this thing that I do every day, it may seem really confined and forced, but in reality, it was freeing me to do the things that I really wanted to do. And it reminded me of a book that I read called Courage to Create by Rollo May. And he links it to the creative process in this really interesting way, where he says, creativity itself requires limits. For the creative act arises out of the struggle of human beings with and against that which limits them. And I don't know about you guys, but like I definitely work best under deadlines. And I feel like this is why. It's because when we're it's like we're a gas that like fills whatever space we're given, you know, like when we have unlimited time, when we have unlimited resources, we don't really do anything. But once we have a structure or something that is putting pressure on us, that's when we rise above and we really excel. So to give you an idea of what I do in my ritual, an example of like a classic hour-long ritual that I've done is I'll work on my bullet journal for 5 minutes, then I'll check or clean my email for 5 minutes, try to keep that empty inbox standard. I'll read for 15 minutes, I'll meditate for 5 minutes, then I'll exercise and stretch for 10 minutes, I'll clean the house for 5 minutes, and then the last bit of it, I'll work on a new skill that I'm trying to develop or a project that is due. And it's not really enough to do anything substantial, and that's why it's kind of like maybe seems a little counterintuitive to break it up like this, because like how much can you really get done if you work on a project for 15 minutes, you know? But the belief that I had when I started, and what I think it's confirmed over all this time, is that it really adds up. You know, 5 minutes a day for 300 days, you know, considering maybe there's 60 something days every year where you're not going to do it, you know, it's a weekend or it's a holiday or something, that's still 25 hours of every year that you're doing something. So, you know, if you feel like you're not reading enough, but you're not, you know, like, oh, 5 minutes a day of reading, like, what is that going to do? Well, it's either you don't read anything or you end up reading for 25 hours a year, you know? So it's just a matter of taking something small and realizing that it can snowball really quickly. I think one thing I mentioned earlier is, you know, like you shouldn't aim for a big habit. You shouldn't be too ambitious. You should really start with something small. And this is an example of that with the 5 minutes things, but it's also something you have to do for an hour every day. And so I know a lot of you are sitting yourself thinking like, I don't have an hour every day. Like if I want to develop a habit, do I really have to, you know, spend an hour every day doing something? And it's like, no, of course not. You should start with something small. And this isn't the first system that I tried when I was wanting to develop habits. I actually started with something a lot smaller, and I call it like a gateway habit, because the habit that actually got me to a place where I could consistently do this hour-long ritual was, drum roll please, flossing. Woo! I don't know how many of you guys floss every day. I know for me, I didn't floss growing up. I didn't floss as a young adult, and it wasn't something that I really thought was that important, even though like I have terrible teeth or whatever. But I knew that it was something really simple for me, in that it was something that I never did. It was something that I knew was good for me. I knew that it was something that was like kind of a pain in the ass, because I have, you know, a permanent retainer, and like the type of floss that I have to do to get around it is just like a pain in the ass. but I knew that it would only take like a minute every day. And so in the fall of 2016, I decided like, okay, so if I could do this small thing every day for 100 days, then maybe that, you know, like exercising that muscle effect will take place, and I'll be able to translate that daily habit into something else. And that's what ended up happening. I got to the 100 days and I realized like, oh crap, like if I can do this for 100 days, when I thought that I couldn't do anything for 100 days, or I thought that I couldn't have the discipline to do a habit for 100 days, then what else could I do? And so it was this psychological kind of trick that got me to, like I said, a gateway habit of realizing I could do more with this. But another big part of that, and some of you mentioned this in your intros, is having the streak was a huge motivator. I don't know if anyone else feels like this. I'm sure some of you do, but like I am 200,000% more likely to do something if I can unlock an achievement for it. If I have like a little tally counter that tracks how many consecutive days I've flossed, you know, I think to myself in the bathroom, like, do I really need to floss? I'm tired. I just want to go lie down. But then I know, you know, that little number flashes in my head, and I know, okay, if I don't do this, I'm gonna have to write a 0 tomorrow. I'm gonna have to cross out the boxes or whatever. And then I'm just like, okay, it's not worth it to me to like not do this thing, you know? And it works. You know, I'm currently in my tracker, I'm at 562 days of flossing. And that was after like one I missed in November. And before that, I had been doing it a long time. So, you know, I feel like it works. If I've been doing it almost every day for 2 years straight, and I started, you know, a few years ago, then it sounds like a habit that I wouldn't break. So you would think like, I don't need to keep tracking it, but it's the tracking that does it, you know? So we're gonna go into habit tracking a little bit later with the Atomic Habits book. But I wanna go over one place that I track my habits, which is my bullet journal. I hope that this picture loads. I think it's probably a little bit high quality. I'll just start talking and then hopefully it pops up. So for those of you who aren't familiar with bullet journaling, it's sort of this like really popular Pinterest kind of thing where, you know, you like design your own planner, and it's like, it looks really pretty, and you have all these headers and you can have stickers and all this stuff. But for me, it was really interesting because I often would buy a planner and get really excited about it and fill it all out, and then realize after using it for a month or two, like, oh, this doesn't have what I need. You know, the calendar's too big, or the daily page is too cluttered with all this stuff I don't want, or, you know, I want a place that I can track my budget and I don't have that or something. And the bullet journal became a way for me to have the exact planner that I wanted because I would make it from scratch. Let me just see if I can, I don't know why the other one's not loading. Okay, well, I'll just say, oh, I should post the slides. I don't know why I didn't post the slides. Sorry, real quick, let me pause so that I can show you guys, so I can share the link with everyone, because that would probably solve a lot of problems. Okay, so the slides are in the chat. Sorry, I didn't post them earlier. But anyway, so you can look at the slide that's loading. It's just my habit tracker that I used like 1 month and then decided it was ridiculous, so I didn't do it again. But this is an example of my bullet journal sort of like through the years since I've started in 2017. And so the cool thing about it, like I said, is that it's exactly the planner that you want. So, oh shit, sorry. I'll change the settings. Anyone with the link can view. Okay, thanks for that. Let me know if that still doesn't work and I'll figure it out. Okay, so yeah, so the way that my bullet journal works is that, awesome, thank you. It's sort of like at whatever stage I'm at in my life in that moment, my bullet journal sort of morphs and adapts to be what works best for me in that moment. So the general standard sort of format is I have like a month calendar, and then like a 3-month out calendar, and then I have a weekly to do and a monthly to do, and then I have these daily pages. So that's what I'm showing here is even the daily pages kind of morph depending on what I'm prioritizing on those days. So like when I first started, I was tracking what food I was eating and my budget and like my highs and lows for the day and like 10 things I was grateful for. Whereas now, if you look over here, it's like very bare bones, but this was when I was working on my thesis. So I needed a lot of space to ideate or to draw sketches. And then there's some things that are kind of in the middle where it's like, okay, I'm tracking some habits, or I'm like, you know, just sort of adjusting it so that it always fits what I need and it never feels like a burden. But that is also one thing that I would recommend if you're interested in bullet journaling is, you know, if you go to Pinterest, you can find all these examples of people with these beautiful bullet journals that they spend all this time on, and, you know, they treat it like a Bible, like it's this holy object that runs their entire lives. And, you know, to an extent that's true because like, this is my external hard drive. I could not live without this thing. But I feel like the main difference between my bullet journals and a lot of the ones that you see on the internet is, I say, fuck Pinterest, don't make yours pretty, because the prettier it is and the longer it takes you to do it, the less likely you are to actually do it. And the more perfect you try to make it, if you mess up, then it just demotivates you from wanting to fix it or do it again. So I say, you know, mess yours up and, you know, don't worry about it being perfect every day, and just do the bare minimum that you need to keep your habits or the things that you're trying to track, you know, your projects working. Because the last thing you want, if you're trying to make something that helps with your time management, the last thing you want is something that takes a lot of time to manage. So the last system that I want to, just as a quick note, if you're interested in more stuff about the ritual or the bullet journal, I made a blog post back in January of 2019, kind of describing a little bit more of what I do there. So if you're interested in like what specific things I put on my daily page, or like what else I've tried in my ritual, like that's a link to that, but it's a little outdated. So just FYI. The last system that I want to talk about before going over the James Clear book is this skill building system called 100 Days of Making. This is kind of like this beloved and glorified system at ITP because there's a class on it. So much so, I'm surprised it's not like a core foundational class. But what it entails is skill that you want to develop. And, you know, it could be drawing or 3D modeling or telling jokes or writing jokes or something like that. But you produce a finished work every day for 100 days where you work with that skill. And this is a classic example of that process over product stuff that I keep talking about, because it's about making 100 bad Mona Lisas, not you have 100 days to make one good Mona Lisa, you know. Really is like an example of quality leads to, or quantity leads to quality, you know, practice makes perfect. What I did for my 100 Days of Making when I did spring was a little bit unconventional, and I would even go so far as to say I broke the rules. So maybe don't, you know, use me as an example exactly. Do as I say, not as I do, because I ended up doing 2 concurrent 100 Days projects because I couldn't decide on one to do. But neither of them was exactly what I was supposed to do. One was like an input and one was an output. And so this one on the right that you see, this was 100 Days of Unmaking. And this was actually just sort of an expansion to my ritual that I would post on social media, where whatever I was reading in my ritual that day, I would take a cool quote from that reading and post it to my Instagram with a picture. And I'll get to that question here in a second. The second 100 days that I did was 100 Days of Networked Game Design. And this is one where I was actually trying to learn a skill and produce things every day. I was making phone-controlled multiplayer games in Unity, but I wasn't making a game every day. You know, like if I was really adhering to the spirit of the process, I would be, you know, making one thing every day, and the next day I'm working on something completely different, even though maybe the underlying tools that I'm developing are the same. Yeah, to answer Lucy's question, the thing I said earlier about, you know, wanting to not bite off more than you can, it's really important for a process like this, because if you're committing to do something for 100 days and to not, you know, you don't take breaks on weekends, you do it every day for 100 days, you really want to make sure you're setting yourself up for success and not setting yourself for something that you're going to dread doing or not have the time to do. You know, a lot of my classmates, for example, you know, they initially tried really ambitious things. And this is also sort of why I ended up not doing the traditional 100 days, because I realized if I was going to make a game every day for 100 days, it would take me hours and hours and hours. So the general guideline for us that was given to us by a professor was, you know, on a good day, maybe it only takes 30 minutes. And on like a day where you're really struggling, maybe it's an hour and a half. So it should never take longer than 2 hours, because like who has two, I mean, maybe you do have 2 hours every day to work on stuff. I mean, I do because I'm in quarantine and I'm out of school, but like you want it to be something that you can realistically do even on your busiest days. And as far as knowing when you're done, I think it depends on the skill that you're working with. Because for me, I knew I was done because, like I said, I wasn't making a discrete game every day. I knew that I was done when the skill or the specific technique that I wanted to use that day, I had learned and implemented. And so for other people, you know, if it was writing a joke every day, like one of my classmates said, you know, she was done when she illustrated like a comic about the joke and posted it on Instagram. And so it sort of depends on what skill you're building. And yeah, I think as far as themes go, it depends on the skill that you're wanting to work with, but it really does help to narrow. So one of our classmates was wanting to work on her watercolor ability. And she ended up doing 100 days of watercoloring just dogs. And like I said earlier with the Rollo May quote, oftentimes putting limits on yourself lead to greater success than if you had just absolute freedom. Because when you're watercoloring every day for 100 days, you're like, okay, cool, I can watercolor that tree, I can watercolor my friend, I can watercolor my computer, or whatever. But it often, like, by limiting yourself to one specific focus, you have to sort of get creative within those constraints. So with her dogs, she was like, after day 30, she was like, okay, I'm out of dogs. Like I've like watercolored every dog breed I can think of. And then it was like, okay, I'm only gonna watercolor dogs that I see on the street. And then she got a little story to go along with everyone from the owners. And then after day 60, she was like, okay, I'm gonna do cartoon dogs because like I'm tired of drawing real dogs and stuff like that. So you don't even know where you're gonna end up when you start the process. And that's one of the things that I really like about this system is you keep hitting the wall and then you push past it. And then you hit the wall and you push past it. And every time you hit the wall, you're like, there's no way I can do this for another 50 days or another 30 days or another 20 days. But then you do it. And that is what I think is one of the most valuable things about this. The other thing that's really important from this is the shared accountability system that, that we had as a class, but that I would encourage you all to have also if you're trying to go into this, which is when you have a group of people doing 100-day projects, it's really motivating because you have all these other people that are in the same boat as you. You know, when you're hitting that roadblock on day 64, there's someone else who's already been there who was on day 71 or something, and they're like, oh yeah, like when I was there, it really sucked, blah, blah, blah. And it's also a way to keep yourself accountable because you have people who are expecting you to post something. You know, if you are just, everyone decides to start an Instagram, you know, like in our class, when you don't post for a day, people text you and they're like, hey, like, don't forget, you know, if it's midnight, they're like, hey, did you forget today? Like, you know, post or whatever. And it really is a motivating factor because you know people are going to be waiting on it, or you have people who are following you and they're going to know if you miss a day. And it really is that sort of shitty peer pressure thing where it's like, oh no, like what are they going to think of me if I miss today, you know? So yeah, it's great to see that y'all are starting to connect in the chat. I definitely recommend that. I think it can be really exciting. So we're gonna go into a little bit more about the accountability systems that come with a group a little bit later. Yeah, I think that is it for my systems. Some last, oh yeah, and that's the thing about accountability and community. It works because misery loves company. So there are just some more readings, and The Artist's Way that someone mentioned earlier is another one that I would really recommend. But some of the ones that were really helpful for me that were more about the creative process, like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not going to a lot of stuff about the creative process, but these books are highly recommended. We got Flow by, I cannot pronounce his last name, I think it's like Csikszentmihalyi or something like that, or The Courage to Create by Rollo May, and A Technique for Producing Ideas by James Webb Young. So if any of you are hoping for more information on how to create or how to get past like creative roadblocks that are more like kind of ephemeral and more about like just creativity, capital C, then I recommend these things. Oh no, this one's also not loading. Let me pull it up on my thing just to double check. Okay, well, let me move on. So this slide is it's just a whoops, it's just a cover of the book, but it's Atomic Habits by James Clear, and hopefully this loads here in a second because it shouldn't be that big of a photo. But one thing that I want to say before I go into that is this book, I just got it last month, and it's sort of changed like everything that I believe about habits. Not like in the sense that, you know, throw away everything that I just said, but it really was eye-opening in showing me the ways in which my habit, like explaining to me why some of these systems that I've tried have failed, and also giving more evidence as to why some of the things that I've tried that have worked, you know, why they've worked. So it's just really practical and something that I highly recommend. I'm going to be going over sort of the spark notes of it as the rest of this workshop, but if this is something that you're interested in or something that you want to get better at, I highly recommend this book. So one of the big things in his book is the reason it's called Atomic Habits is this sort of idea that tiny changes to your life. I'll write it in the chat. The tiny changes really are like the compound interest of your habits. So if you do something 1% better every day, then after a year, you're nearly 37 times better than you were when you started. So it's not about, you know, oh, I need to do this huge project this month, or I need to, you know, even with the 100 days, it's not about, like I said, after the 100 days, I'm going to have a book, or I'm going to have this gallery of things. It's not about the product. It's just about doing something every day, because by the end of that, you will be the person who has done this thing 100 times, or you've done it, you know, for a little bit better every day. And that can create some really profound changes in the things that you're trying to work on. And the big thing that I keep harking on is that it's really, it's not about the product, it's about the process. You know, forget about the goals, because it doesn't matter what aim you're shooting for. If you don't have the systems underlying that goal or your process in achieving that goal, then you're never going to reach it. You know, it doesn't matter how bad you want something. If you don't have a practical and like, you know, really solid approach to achieving it, then, you know, what's the point? And one quote from the book that I really liked was, you know, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So if you have that foundation where no matter how you're feeling or how shitty a day it was, you're doing the thing and you're doing it the way you've always been doing it, then that's as low as you can go, as opposed to, sure, I may dream of this amazing thing, but if I don't have the foundation, if I don't have the scaffolding to get me there, then what's the point? And the other thing that was really mind-blowing to me about this was his focus on identity and how identity influences our habits. He has this graph about the 3 layers of behavior change. You know, when you're wanting to change your habits, you're looking at the outcomes. You know, you're looking at those goals. Like, I want to be the person that reads every day, or I want to, you know, lose 20 pounds or whatever. And so you try to develop processes that will get you there, when in reality, what you should be focused on is identity, because each day that you practice a habit, or you don't practice a habit, or you practice a bad habit, that is a vote you cast for the person that you want to be. And this was really, like I said, mind-blowing to me, because it's not about what you do, it's about who you are. And that, to me, was like, made so much sense, because the things that are really motivating us, I believe, and like I said earlier, when we are trying to change our habits or become these people, it's we want to be the person with that identity. We want to be the person that works out every day, or we want to be the person that has written a book or plays the guitar or whatever. Because our habits shape our identity, but it's the perceived identity that motivates those habits. So if I change not what I do, but who I believe I am, then it's a lot easier for me to do the things that that person would do. And one thing that really struck me about the book is when he mentions that the root word of identity is from the Latin essentitas and identitum, which essentially means like being repeatedly. So our identity is who we are every day. You know, the person that we practice is the person that we because our identity is built on proof and evidence. You know, when people tell you over and over as a kid, oh, you're not a good artist, or oh, you can't do math, you grow up believing that. And then as an adult, when you tell yourself like, oh, I'm not the person who can diet, or I'm not the person who can, you know, give up meat, that's a narrative that you tell yourself. And it's really important to acknowledge that, because it's I think the most important factor in changing your habits. If it's something that if it's a different person that you want to be, you have to tell yourself that you're a different person. And I often go by the motto, fake it till you make it. You know, if I want to be the person who eats healthier, me as a person right now, I don't eat healthy. I love quesadillas. But if I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, what should I eat for dinner? I'm not thinking, what do I, August, in this present moment, what do I want for dinner? But I'm thinking, what does a healthy person want for dinner? Or this imagined version of me that's healthy, what do they want for dinner? And if it's a quesadilla, great. If it's not a quesadilla, then I want to fake being that person until one day I wake up and it's not even a question that I have to ask myself. It's, what do I want for dinner? Oh yeah, it's this thing that's healthy, you know? And one thing that he stresses a lot is this habit loop. And this made a lot of sense for me coming from my cog sci background. You know, just understanding more of what's happening under the hood can really help inform how to approach changing who you are, or the systems or the habits that you want to develop. And he talked about how every habit has 4 stages. You have the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward. Because habits aren't done for themselves. You know, you don't want to diet, you want to feel healthier, or you know, you don't want to scroll mindlessly on social media, but you want to feel connected and entertained. You don't want to meticulously budget your expenses, but you want financial freedom. So rewards are the goal, the end goal of every habit. The cue is about noticing that reward. The craving is wanting the reward, and the response is obtaining the reward. So for example, you know, when I wake up every morning, I wake up and I feel tired. That's my cue. And I think to myself, man, I want to feel alert. And so I have a craving of feeling alert. So my response is, I should drink a cup of coffee and that'll make me feel more alert. And then I get the reward of feeling more alert. So then drinking coffee becomes associated with waking up. The next time I wake up and I have the cue of I'm tired, I think to myself, hey, I should have a cup of coffee. And I do, and I feel more alert, and it repeats. And another example that kind of blew my mind, because I was working on this workshop and I kept procrastinating by playing games, is I realized it was in a habit loop there also, because I had this cue of, you know, oh, I'm not sure what to do for this lecture or this workshop, and I feel frustrated at this roadblock or this challenge. And so I would then stop or I would have this craving of wanting a way to quickly and easily relieve that frustration. And so I would stop and I would play a video game where I was constantly overcoming challenges successfully and relieving that frustration. And so I got word of, I satisfied my craving to feel like I've overcome the challenge, but it wasn't the challenge that had frustrated me in the first place. So I've now associated playing games with feeling stalled at work, which isn't a good habit loop to be in. And so he goes over these 4 really important things of waypoints of how to create a good habit. When you want to create a good habit, you need to make it, which affects the cue. You need to make it attractive, so you crave it. You need to make it easy, so obtaining or acting on that response is very simple. And you need to make it satisfying, so it's an actual reward that your brain can then trigger the habit loop, the habit formation loop. And are like levers that you can imagine. You know, if you are trying your hardest to start a new habit, but you know, one of these levers isn't in the right position, it can be almost impossible. You know, it doesn't matter how much you want to start a new habit. If it's not easy, then it's going to be really tough. Or if it's not satisfying, then you're not going to want to do it. Or if it's not obvious, you're never going to remember to do it. So you need to make sure you have all these levers in the right place. And we're going to go over in detail how to do that for each of these steps. But the inverse of that is how to break a bad habit is just to flip all these scripts. So if you want to break a bad habit, you want to make the cue invisible, so you don't think about doing it, or it never occurs to you subconsciously to do it. If you make it unattractive, then you don't want to do it. You make it difficult so that actually performing the habit is more difficult than not performing the habit. And you make it unsatisfying so that it becomes associated in your brain with a negative emotion as opposed to a positive one. So the first part of make it obvious is obvious because in order to make a new habit, you need to know what habits you already have. You need to, one of the things he recommends in the book is you make a list of all the habits that you currently have, and then you kind of give them a grade based on how much they're leading you to what you want or how positive or negative they are in your life. And he argues that there's not really good or bad habits, even though I've been using that language. There's just effective ones because all habits serve to solve a problem. The ones that you repeat are successful at solving that problem. And so one thing that he recommends is the system of pointing, which is just literally saying out loud what you're doing and why, because it helps raise, a lot of times, habits are these things that we don't think about doing. They're very much unconscious or subconscious. And so when you say them out loud, you're bringing them up to the conscious and you're reminding yourself, oh yeah, this is a choice that I'm making and this is why I'm doing it. So even if it's something that you don't want to be doing, just making yourself aware of it can be a really pivotal point in deciding to do something different. It can also help to literally say it out loud to someone else. Which helps tie into that accountability thing we were talking about earlier. Because if I want to go on a run in the morning and I just think to myself, like, yeah, maybe I'll go and do that, and then I wake up in the morning and I don't want to do it, then whatever. But if I tell my partner, like, hey, I want to start prioritizing my health, tomorrow I'm going to go on a run I'm going to go on a run in the morning. And then I wake up in the morning and I say, I don't want to go. But then I think to myself, shit, I told my partner I would do it. What are they going to think if I don't do it? And so it just helps add a little bit more of that societal pressure, which it normally can be a bad thing, but we can use it to our advantage here. And along with that, you can do something more formal, like an implementation intention, which is where you literally, when this happens, I will blank. If you're trying to start a new habit, it can help a lot. You say, okay, when I take my lunch break, I'm going to do 10 push-ups or something, and you literally write it down. So it's not just something that's floating off as a possibility. It's something that you've committed to on paper, which is ultimately meaningless, but it can help a lot of people, just make that formal switch in their mind. And it's also really important when you're making these intentions to think about ways in which you're setting yourself up for success. You don't want to make some very ambitious, very unrealistic goal of like, okay, you know what? When I wake up, I'm going to run a 10K every day. It's just not realistic. Consider when you're making these things, when you're most likely to be successful and what you are doing that is going to be successful. So if it's really tough for you to wake up and exercise, don't set yourself up for failure and say, okay, when I wake up, I got to run this mile or whatever. But if you know that it's something that you're usually into when you get off from work, say, okay, when I get off from work, I'll run a mile. Even though it may not be ideal for you and like, the perfect version of me would work out for an hour every day before work. But like, whatever. You got to work with what you have and you got to be realistic and honest with yourself. One thing that helps with that really blew my mind also was this concept of habit stacking. And this is where you're basically hacking the habits that you already have and attaching a little, leech onto them that is, it's like a Trojan horse of inserting the habit that you actually want. So for example, in the earlier example of me getting up every morning and drinking coffee, that's something that I do every day. If I don't drink coffee, it's like something's gone wrong, So that is a habit that I have that I'm going to do no matter what every day. I mean, hopefully. If I then have a habit that I want, like I want to meditate every day, or I want to read 5 minutes every day. If I then include that along with drinking the coffee, then that cue is already there. I don't have to remind myself, oh yeah, I was supposed to meditate today, or when am I going to meditate today? Like, should I do it now? Or I don't really feel like it. Maybe I'll do it after work, and then I don't do it. Instead, I insert it along with the cue that already exists. I'm tired, I wake up, I have my coffee, I'm alert, I meditate. It's just a natural succession that I don't have to think about. The cue is already built in. And obviously it can be challenging to start a new habit like that when you wake up and your brain's not really there and you haven't had your coffee yet, but you can leave yourself notes, or you can, set yourself up so that, like, let's say you wanted to read, you put the book right next to the coffee maker. So as soon as you see it, oh yeah, I was gonna read after I drink my coffee. So that's something that I think is really useful. Another thing about the cues and making these habits obvious is you really want to focus on your environment, because the context is going to inform the cues. And it's a lot easier to change a habit when you're in a new environment rather than when you're in an environment that already has a lot of context for habits that you have. And one of the things he says in the book is when you mix contexts, you mix habits, and the easier ones are going to win out. So if I'm at my desk and this is the computer that I work on, but it's also the computer that I play video games on, there's never a time where I'm like I don't know if you guys watch The Daily Show, but there's this one bit that he did at the beginning of quarantine where he's like working on one side of the couch and he goes, okay, it's time for the weekend. And he closes the computer and he shifts over one seat and he opens up his computer again and he's like on Netflix or whatever. And it's something like that, like it can be something as simple as you move the chair to the other side of the desk and then, all of a sudden your entire mindset shifts. And if you try to mix things together, that's where it can be really difficult because, when you're focusing on cues, or when you're not focusing on cues because they're, in your subconscious, it can be really challenging to know when or when not to do certain things. And one of the things that really resonated with me about this part is disciplined people don't exercise more self-control, they exercise less because they put themselves in situations where they are not as tempted as much. If you look at someone who has the same routine every day and they do all this stuff and it's like really inspiring and you want to be just like them, you look at what their environment is like, not what their brain is like, because it's not about willpower, like I said earlier. It's about the ways in which they've set up their space to be like a conveyor belt that they don't even have to think about. They do the thing and it leads to the next thing and it leads to the next thing. And before you know it, you haven't made a single decision, but you've done the things that you want to do. You've turned those habits into, or you've turned your environment into like a factory for your habits. And I feel a lot of, it's easy to say that when you don't live in a shoebox in New York City. So it's like, obviously, I'm not going to say like Marie Kondo, to throw away everything that doesn't, relate to your habits. But it's just something to keep in mind, even if it's a little tiny shift that you can make, like some people are talking about in the comments, it can really make a lot of difference. So the second thing that he mentioned when talking about the craving is to start a new habit, you need to make it attractive. And he talked a lot about this dopamine-driven feedback loop. Everything that we do because we want something, right? All these habits, we're not doing them because we, want the habit. We want the thing that is going to lead to. And really, it's not the reward itself that gets us something. It's the anticipation of that reward. When we take actions, we're not doing them. It's kind of a weird semantic thing, but for me, because it's not about, thinking that if I work out, I'm going to feel good. It's not about feeling good when I think about working out. It's knowing that if I work out, I feel good. And so it is the anticipation of that feeling that gets me to take the action. And one thing that can really be helpful with that habit stacking idea from earlier is a concept called temptation bundling. And that's where you sort of do that habit stacking Trojan horse thing, but you include things that you want to do. So it's not necessarily habits that you have, unless, this is a habit or something. Doing something that is pleasurable to you, but making sure a prerequisite for that activity is a habit that you want. So for example, if, you want to start reading every day, or what's a better example? Like, I know a lot of times when talking about temptation bundling, people mention, if there's a podcast that you really like listening to, and this is something that I do when I go on runs, if there's a podcast that you really like listening to, don't let yourself listen to it unless you're doing something that you want to cultivate. Like I will only listen to the podcast if I'm running. And then therefore when a new episode comes out, I go, oh shit, I need to go running. And so it just helps kind of build habits by incorporating something that you already want. I want to listen to the podcast. So then it makes me want to run. And another thing that's important about this craving is also related to that environment. So your culture sets your expectation for what's normal. And so if you surround yourself with a culture or with people who have the habits that you want, you're more likely to also want those habits or perform those habits. So, you know, if you want to lose weight, you join an exercise club or something like that. And it's because it's really, one thing about it is we are social creatures, and our shared identity becomes so ingrained with our personal identity, or interwoven with our personal identity, that the communities that we are a part of define who we are. You know, it's like that classic, my dad told me when I was a kid, you know, oh, show me who your friends are and I'll show you who you are. But it's like, it's true, because if you, or what's that quote about, you know, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, you know? So you always want to be surrounding yourself with people who can help you succeed, because they are also themselves succeeding, or you are working together to succeed. So, you know, if you start up a little accountability group, you know, that's what you're doing there. Another thing that's important is to stay in those communities, because let's say you want to lose weight, so you join this exercise group to lose weight, and then you lose it, and you're like, great, I'm done, I don't need you anymore, bye. It's probably not going to last, because you've incorporated those people into the habit. And so obviously, you know, it's not like you need to keep the same exact people around. Lord knows that's not entirely possible, but it's about that shared space and that community, that motivating factor of having the peer pressure of people around you to keep up the things that you've associated with those other people. All right, cool. So that's it for Make It Attractive. One thing that I think is just really important, and I think this is the point that gets really understated. Like, it seems really obvious, but in practice, people don't do it. Like, I know for me, like I said, like, I get really ambitious with things and then I don't do them, but it's because they're not easy. So when you're talking about the response part of the habit loop, you really need to make it easy, because oftentimes the difference between doing a habit or keeping up with a habit and not is just, you didn't set yourself up for success, and that it was something that was too difficult to do. So one of the things that he talks about that really made a lot of sense for me was that there's a difference between being in motion and taking action. And for those of you, you know, if you've ever felt like you're spending a lot of time on a project, but you're not really getting anywhere, I feel like that's when we're being in motion, but we're not taking action. You know, part of the reason why, like I said, it's sort of making me rethink my daily ritual is there's a lot of times where I feel like I'm not really getting anywhere with the skills that I'm working on. You know, even though I'm spending 15 minutes a day on a project, if I don't really do anything with the project, then I don't feel like it's getting anywhere, which makes sense, because if I spend 15 minutes a day outlining a book that I want to write or an article that I want to write, but I don't actually write anything, then I'm not doing anything for it. And it's tempting, because being in motion allows us to tell ourselves that we're working. Oh, I am working, I'm outlining, or whatever. But we feel like we're making progress, when in actuality, there's no risk of failure. And that's the most important part. It can often be a way to sort of distance ourselves and say, okay, I'm working, look at me, I'm doing the thing, but I'm not actually taking a risk. And so motivation, it's interesting, because it's not the key to habit change. Like I said earlier, it's not about willpower. It's not about how much you want it, because we, as these, you know, biological creatures, our motivation is to be lazy and to do whatever is convenient. You know, energy is precious, and our brains are hardwired to preserve it. You know, it's for our survival. So obviously we're not going to do anything that is super, requires us to exert a lot of effort, because that goes against what we were, you know, what we evolved to be. And so the more energy a habit requires, the less likely it is to occur. And he calls that the law of least effort. And so if you have a habit that you're trying to form, or a habit that you're trying to break, the most simple way to try to flip the script on it is to make the alternative to that habit more difficult than the habit itself. So, you know, if I have the habit of checking my phone whenever I get frustrated with a project I'm working on, or I just scroll through social media because I'm like procrastinating, it's because it's easier than working on my lecture or whatever. You know, if I pick up my phone and I do this, that's super simple. But if I instead, when I'm getting ready to work on something, I go and I put my phone in another room, then it's easier for me to just stay at my desk and keep typing than it is to get up, go to the other room, pick up my phone. You know, I'm like, why am I here? Oh yeah, blah, 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 you know, or even more, I could go extreme and give the phone to my partner and say, hey, hide this for me. And then I know the alternative to me you know, working is, okay, I gotta go find my phone. If I really want to scroll social media mindlessly, I gotta go look for my phone and try to find it, which is just gonna be so difficult. So I don't want to do that. And the analogy that he uses is this bent water hose. You know, if you're trying to pass water through a hose and there's a little kink in it, then like it's not going to come out as a trickle, and you have two options. You can either ramp up, you know, turn the valve, ramp up the water pressure and try to force the water through that bend, or you can just unbend the hose. And so his whole takeaway from that is reduce the friction. Don't try to force past it. So it's not that you need more willpower or more motivation to do something. It's that you need to remove the obstacles to that thing that you're trying to do, or rather put more obstacles in front of the thing that you don't want to do. One of the things that he recommends to make it easy to do something is the thing he calls the 2-minute rule. And Ernest Hemingway has something similar. If anyone else is a writer, you may have heard of this, but like which is, you know, when you're writing something and the going gets good, stop, because you're going to want to come back to it and finish it. But if you get all the way through it and you get to that point where you're like, you've spent and you're kind of like bored and exhausted now, then like the next time you don't really have anything to look forward to. You never, you know, when you stop halfway, you're keeping your excitement up at the top. And when you're starting a new habit, I think that this makes a lot of sense, because you, like I said, you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. Because if you do and you try to be ambitious, you're only setting yourself up for failure. You know, and I'm the worst at this, because new habits for me are really exciting, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can run every day, and I do it for 5 days in a row, and I think I'm like a marathon runner, and I'm like, great, now I'm gonna up it to a 10K on the weekends and all this stuff, and it just like, it never works. Because when you're excited about something and you're really motivated at the peak and you try to push from there, it's like when you go down, the gap is that much wider. Instead, you should be focusing on like the bare minimum, which seems a little counterintuitive. You know, like let's say I wanted to run a marathon and my goal is to run a marathon. I may start by only walking around the block, or only once a day I walk around the block once. And I don't allow myself to walk around the block anymore or to run at all. And you may think like, wait, if your goal is to run a marathon, walking around the block once is not going to help you do a marathon, you know, but it's not about the goal. It's about getting yourself in the position of doing that thing every day. And it's then your goal just becomes to show up, because if you get used to showing up, then you can build from there. It's about standardizing, then optimizing. So you don't need to think about, it's kind of like in programming, you know, like the worst thing you could do at the beginning is over optimize. What you need to do is just start doing the thing, even if it's 1 minute or 5 minutes or one version of the thing. And it's almost like the Ernest Hemingway thing, where you don't allow yourself to do more than that, because then when you get used to it, you're already wanting more, as opposed to dreading more that you've already loaded onto your plate. And ultimately, this is because it's about reinforcing your identity, the stuff we've been talking about through this whole workshop. Because if you go to the gym every day, it doesn't matter if you go for 5 minutes or for 3 hours. Either way, you are the person who goes to the gym every day. And these small actions confirm the type of person that you want to be. Because as I said earlier, your identity reinforces your actions. So you need to think about the type of person you want to be, and you need to do like the bare minimum to be that person. And it kind of sounds like a cop-out, but it's for the long term. You're trying to think about what is going to lead to the most likely, you know, path to success. And biting off more than you can chew at the beginning is not it. So the last section with the reward is make it satisfying, because our brains, obviously, when we're doing anything, the things that we repeat are the ones where the last time we did it, our brain said, oh, hey, this feels good. Let's do this again. And that's just how we're wired. And if we want to develop a new habit, then it needs to be something that is immediately satisfying, because our brains aren't wired for delayed satisfaction. I mean, it was only very recently in our evolution that we were even able to like plan ahead for the future. So anything that we do, we need to make sure that we are coupling that action with something that makes us feel good in that moment, not something that is like in the future. You know, if you're trying to budget because you want a new vacation. It might be tempting, you know, to like buy something new, and your brain is going to get a rush of pleasure if you buy something because it's like, yay, new thing, and it's exciting, and you're, you know, blah, blah, blah. But if you're not buying anything, then nothing happens. Like if you don't spend money, you don't get a reward either way. And so it's hard to develop a habit over nothing, if that makes any sense. So instead, you have to pair that non-action with an action that is satisfying. You know, you open up your budget app and you add the $10 to your trip section where you have the picture of the beach, and then you see the little green bar go up, and then you're reinforced because you had that stimulus of the color of the green, and you see the beach and you're thinking about it in your mind. And so your brain says, oh, hey, we did a nice thing and it feels good. Let's do this again, as opposed to not feeling anything but maybe like disappointment. And the inverse of that is if you're pairing a habit with not feeling good, you're not going to want to do it. No matter how much you, in theory, want to do it, your brain is going to tell you, oh, don't do that thing again. It sucked the last time we did it. So one thing that can be helpful both for that visual cue of seeing your habit take shape, but also for keeping your habits active is habit tracking, like we mentioned earlier. And keeping a log of your habits and goals makes you more likely to succeed at them for a variety of reasons. You know, it's a reminder when you see it. It's motivation because you don't want to break the streak or however you're tracking. And it also keeps you honest because it's easy for us to sort of distort our own narrative of who we are and what we're doing. You know, if we say, oh yeah, like I've been working on this book, like I did an outline last week, or I did a chapter the week before that, or whatever. But then you look at your notes and you're like, oh shit, that was 2 months ago, or oh, that was 3 months ago, or something, you know? Instead, if you're actively tracking these habits that you want, you can see it in front of your eyes. You can't lie to yourself. It's just, hey, look, we didn't do it for the past 3 days, or we've been doing it for 2 weeks. Look at us, we're great, you know? And it becomes a way to help reinforce that. One thing that I want to note about habit trackers, though, is something that I fell into. Sometimes they can have the effect of demotivating you if you mess up and have a day where you don't do it. You see that empty square, or you see the number 0, and it's just like so shitty. You're just like, oh, what's the point? Like I already messed up. Like I might as well just like quit everything and go, you know, move, like give up my life. So an important mantra that he has in the book that I think is really important is don't miss twice, because we're human, we're not perfect, we're gonna mess up, but the important is to not let that accident happen again. It's that process of showing up rather than doing something well. Because if you are the person who, you know, always shows up, it doesn't matter if you're the person who does it well every time, because over the long run, you're going to get more done and you're going to feel better and be further along than if you were doing it perfect every time and then you messed up and you never did it because it was perfect. You know, it's like that perfect is the enemy of good or enemy of done thing. So habit trackers can also be a little bit tricky to balance if, you know, like I said earlier, you're tempted to go overboard on it. You know, if you're the type of person that overloads habits, you might be also the kind of person that overloads tracking those habits. And just like your habits, tracking them needs to be easy. So at a certain point, you know, for me, tracking my habits in my bullet journal was going to take 15 minutes every day. And that was longer than a lot of my habits that I was tracking. So clearly it was unsustainable. Another way of tracking your habits and to make the habit unsatisfying, or make not doing the habit unsatisfying, is to use those accountability partners. Because when you tell someone that you're going to do something, or you make an agreement between someone about the habits that you're both trying to work on, you've agreed to be honest with them. You've agreed to hold each other to a certain standard. And you make a commitment to them as well as yourself. So suddenly, if you miss a day, you're not only failing to uphold the promise you kept to yourself, you're letting your partner down. You're breaking your promise to them. And I don't know about you, but you know, my opinion about myself varies from day to day, but I'm a social creature that cares about what other people think of me. And I don't want someone that I care about to see how lazy and wish-washy I am, or to think of me as a person who can't keep a promise. And oftentimes you can make it, you know, as formal as you want it to be. some people find a lot of value in making like a literal contract with like monetary consequences. You know, one of the stories in the book talked about a guy who wanted to lose 20 pounds. And so he made a contract with his partner and with his personal trainer that if he, you know, didn't diet in a certain way, or if he didn't track his calories, or if he didn't go on a run after dinner or whatever it was, then he would literally Venmo them like $100 or $500. And that was something something he signed and made it super official, worked for him. So it depends on where you want to go, but ultimately the more structure I think that you can put around something, as long as it's, like I said, an easy structure that doesn't take a lot of effort to do, the more roadblocks there are to not doing that thing that you've set out to do. So yeah, we're just about done. Just as a reminder, these are the things that he talks about in the book that I think are really important waypoints to when you're developing a new habit, things to keep in mind when you're planning on how best to be successful at that habit. So you need to find out whatever the cue is that you're going to tie that habit to and make that cue obvious. You know, pair it with something that you're already doing. Then when you have the craving for the completion of that habit, you need to make sure that craving is attractive. It's something that is going to motivate you to continue the habit. Then the response that you take to fulfill the habit needs to be as easy as possible. It needs to be something that it takes more effort to not do that thing than it is to do the thing. And then lastly, you want to make sure that the reward you get for completing that habit is actually immediately satisfying, not something that's satisfying in the future, or not something that is like, you know, not satisfying. It needs to be satisfying. And so hopefully that was useful to you guys. I definitely got a lot out of making this workshop, so I appreciate everyone for coming. And I can stick around for the next 10 minutes if anyone wants to chat or if anyone has any questions. And like I said at the beginning, if you have any comments, I would love to hear your feedback at this link, just any questions, comments, or things that I can do to make us better. But thanks everyone for coming and participating, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your week.